It started with a sign I didn't authorize, planted on a lawn I cut myself, next to a mailbox I built by hand. Violation pending, non-compliant property. 6 bold, all-caps words staring at me in the morning sun like some bureaucratic gravestone. Right there in front of my porch, nailed into the soil like it belonged there. Now, I'm not the kind of man to yell at clouds or argue with parking meters, but when someone walks onto my land and declares it defective without a conversation or even a knock on the door, I tend to get curious. Professionally curious. I picked up the sign, turned it over, half expecting some ironic twist, maybe an apology note stapled to the back, maybe even a typo I could laugh at. No such luck. Just a thick laminate coating and the smug stink of suburban entitlement. The envelope was worse, sealed with the HOA crest, gold foil, double embossed, real fancy stuff. Inside, a formal violation notice from the Greater Evergreen Trails Homeowners Association, citing me for architectural disharmony and refusal to integrate into the community agreement structure, which is rich considering I never joined their damn HOA. I didn't even live in their neighborhood. Let that sink in for a second. I was being penalized for not complying with a contract I never signed, by a group I had no legal connection to, enforced by a man I've exchanged exactly 4 words with in my life, all of them consisting of good morning, followed by forced smiles and mutual suspicion. I stared at the letter for a while, standing in the doorway of the home I designed myself, on land I bought 20 years ago, specifically because it wasn't part of any HOA. Then I folded the letter neatly, placed it on the kitchen counter next to the morning paper, and started a fresh pot of coffee. Strong, black, unflavored, just like I like my legal precedents. Because see, I didn't just read the Constitution, I've spent 3 decades interpreting it from the bench. I'm Harold Whitaker, retired district judge, and I don't play neighborhood politics. But apparently my new neighbor, Colin Masterson, didn't get the memo. Now, before we go any further, let me take you back to where this all started. Back before the signs, before the threats, before the HOA started sniffing around like a dog that mistook a boundary line for a chew toy. It was 2003 when I bought this land. I was still on the bench back then, long hours, high stakes, the usual judicial circus. I'd presided over everything from land disputes to criminal appeals, but that year I decided it was time to lay the foundation for something permanent, something mine. I wanted space, privacy, and peace. The kind of peace you can only earn after years of listening to lawyers argue about easements and dog bites and who owns which half of a fence. So I bought 2 acres on the far edge of town, right where the county line gives a polite nod to nowhere. No HOA, no covenants, no board committees with clipboards and sun visors measuring my grass like it was a science experiment. Just me, the land, and a set of architectural blueprints I had drawn up by a former student of mine from the community college. I didn't just want a house, I wanted a statement. One that said, I earned this. Every inch. It took 11 months to finish the build. Brick by brick, window by window, every detail was chosen with care. The front porch wraps around the house like a handshake. The windows are double-hung wood sash, a nod to the historic courthouses I used to sit in, and the crown jewel, the oak tree, planted dead center in the front yard. Tall, proud, unyielding. I dug the hole myself, poured compost with my bare hands, and watched it grow over the years into a living reminder of what patience and purpose can build. That tree is where I read every morning. It's where my grandson learned to ride a bike, and it's where I stood the day that HOA sign tried to declare my home non-compliant. Funny thing is, the only thing out of place on that lawn was the sign itself. But of course, in suburbs like mine, the worst invasions don't start with bulldozers or battering rams. They start with paper, quietly, passively, with just enough legal-sounding gibberish to make you question whether your land is still yours. And that's exactly how Colin tried to move in. But what he didn't know is that I kept receipts. And the Constitution? It still holds up just fine, even on my front porch. About 10 days after the sign incident, just as I started to believe that maybe someone at the HOA had come to their senses, or at least learned how property lines work, I got my first official notice. It was hand-delivered, no postage, no signature, just a plain white envelope tucked under the welcome mat like some passive-aggressive calling card. The letter was printed on HOA letterhead with faux legal formatting. Bold headings, centered text, unnecessary Latin. I read it over twice, then once more for the sheer novelty. Apparently, my house had been flagged for non-standard structural conformity and disharmonious visual encroachment. You've got to admire the creativity. That's a lot of syllables to say, your house doesn't match ours and we don't like it. Now, for context, my house sits on a separate parcel. Always has. It was never part of the HOA charter. I verified that personally in 2003 when I bought the land and had the title searched by a clerk who owed me a favor. The HOA was formed a few years later around the cookie-cutter development that cropped up down the hill. But Colin, our very ambitious HOA president, wasn't one to let details like legality or geography get in the way of asserting control. This notice cited two supposed violations: excessive color, contrast with community properties, lack of architectural alignment with district cohesion guidelines, which again is bureaucratic poetry for your house is green and we prefer beige. Now, a less patient man might have called up the HOA and delivered a few choice words. A younger version of myself might have drafted a 10-page counter-argument with case citations and a rhetorical throat punch in the final paragraph. But I'm retired. I have time now. And besides, I find silence to be a far more unnerving response. So I didn't reply, I didn't acknowledge it, I didn't even throw the letter away. I placed it in a file folder marked unofficial business, slipped it into my filing cabinet, and went back to trimming the hedges. And I'll tell you this, there's a certain calm in letting your opponent believe they've landed a punch, when you know they've just overextended their reach. But in my gut, I already knew this wasn't a one-time thing. People like Colin don't stop after the first letter. They circle, they produced, they escalate, and he was just getting started. About a week after I filed the letter away, forgotten in practice but not in principle, I noticed something strange. My garbage bin had been rotated, not knocked over, not vandalized, just turned slightly off-angle from the curb. The kind of thing you wouldn't notice unless you were the sort of man who spent 40 years arriving at court 15 minutes early and parked in the exact same spot. 2 days later, it happened again. The third time, it was left open, lid propped up like an accusation. That's when I found the small white adhesive sticker affixed to the side. Issued property, HOA Waste Management Compliance Review. Issued by whom? For what? Under what authority? That's when it clicked. This wasn't about the trash. It was about getting inside my routine. Probing, poking, sending a message. I removed the sticker, dropped it in the bottom of the bin, and closed the lid. Neatly, deliberately. Then I wrote it down. Time, date, details. I had a whole drawer full of empty notebooks. Figured it was time to use one. That weekend, it escalated. A certified letter arrived. This one postmarked, hand-signed, and folded so tightly it cracked along the crease. To Mr. Harold Whitaker. You are hereby notified of non-conforming perimeter maintenance. This includes, but is not limited to, unapproved shrubbery variants and unkempt sightlines visible from Trail's Edge Road. Let me break that down for you. My boxwoods were too tall, and they dared to offend someone's view from a street that technically doesn't touch my property. I stood in the front yard that afternoon, looking at those shrubs, trimmed with shears I've owned longer than most of these board members have been paying property taxes, and I realized something. This wasn't about aesthetics, it was about removal. They didn't want me to comply. They wanted me gone. It didn't matter that I'd lived here longer than any of them, that I'd built this place myself, that my house sat outside their jurisdiction like a quiet rebuttal to their entire existence. No, to people like Colin, that made me worse. An exception. A challenge. And in his HOA handbook, challenges were to be cited, fined, and grounded to submission by policy and pestering. The following Monday, I caught a woman with a clipboard walking along the tree line behind my backyard. Not on the sidewalk, not even on the road, on my land. She didn't see me at first. I was watering the side beds in a straw hat and a t-shirt that said due process is my love language. When I stepped around the hydrangeas and made eye contact, she froze. Can I help you? I asked. Oh, I'm from the HOA Maintenance Committee, she stammered. We're surveying visual obstructions. You're on private property. Well, the boundaries are somewhat... They're not. This parcel line is recorded with the county. Shall I call the sheriff, or will you escort yourself off my land? She left, quickly, and I stood there for a moment, watching her retreat through the bushes like a deer that wandered into the wrong yard. I didn't feel angry, not yet, just focused. Because see, that woman wasn't acting on a whim. She was sent. Colin was ramping up, turning the screws, testing limits. The man couldn't compel me by law, so he'd try to wear me down with irritation, erosion, attrition. Little acts of theater designed to exhaust. But that's the problem with people who never studied war. They think every slow push is a victory. Me, I studied chess before I studied law, and I knew when an opponent was moving pawns just to feel busy, so I waited, I documented it, and I let them keep walking forward, blind to the fact that every step was putting them squarely where I wanted them, because I wasn't just going to win this. I was going to make them regret ever bringing their fake jurisdiction across my grass. The first thing they teach you in law school, well, at least the first thing worth remembering, is that when your opponent starts flailing, you don't respond with emotion. You respond with process. So I wrote a letter. Formal tone. Structured argument. 2 citations. 1 footnote. I even printed it on linen stock, the kind I used back in chambers for sentencing memoranda. I addressed it to the Greater Evergreen Trails Homeowners Association president and board, and sent copies to the city zoning office, the planning commission, and, just for sport, the county clerk. The letter made 3 things clear. My property lay outside the legal jurisdiction of the HOA. Their attempts at enforcement constituted harassment. Further contact would be regarded as trespass and escalated accordingly. I even included a plat map with highlighted boundaries just in case reading comprehension was an issue. A week passed, then 2. No response. Then, like clockwork, came the envelope. This one was thicker. Fancy seal. Double envelope like they thought I'd be impressed by weight alone. Inside, a formal request for reconsideration addressed to resident of non-integrated property. No name, no salutation, just a pile of jargon wrapped in fake diplomacy. They requested that I attend the next HOA board meeting to clarify alignment potential and facilitate neighborly consensus. In other words, come kneel in front of the committee and beg to be left alone. Now, I wasn't obligated to go, not by law, not even by courtesy, but I went anyway, not for them, for me. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a building that looked like a Pottery barn catalog had been converted into a tax write-off. White walls, driftwood accents, glass bowl of peppermints on the reception counter. They even had little folding name tents for the board members. Collins was centered perfectly. President underlined twice. I wore a blue blazer and a pocket square, no tie, just enough formality to remind them who I used to be. "Mr. Whitaker," Collins said as I entered, all teeth and theater, "we're glad you came." I nodded, said nothing. The meeting began with the usual theater, approval of minutes, budget updates, a motion about a broken swing set. Then they got to me. "Item 7, Collins said, tapping his stack of notes. "Clarification of status for Trails Edge Parcel, 2047B. He turned to me with the kind of smile you see on game show hosts right before they open the wrong door. "We'd like to discuss opportunities for better integration with the surrounding community," he said. "I'm not a part of your community," I replied evenly. "Nor have I ever agreed to be governed by your association. That's a matter of public record." "Yes, well," he said, flashing a paper, "we have some historic documentation that suggests your lot may fall under the expanded charter filed in." "If you're referring to the 2014 zoning amendment, that was filed without notification, without owner consent, and without legal basis. The county confirmed that when I called last month." That quieted the room. One of the board members, a woman with tortoiseshell glasses and a notepad the size of a legal brief, leaned toward Colin and whispered something. He brushed her off. Colin cleared his throat. "Our intent here is not adversarial," he said. "We're simply asking that you cooperate for the good of the neighborhood." "I've lived on that land longer than your HOA has existed," I said calmly. "I pay my taxes, I mow my lawn, and I don't need your permission to live peacefully in my own home." Silence. Then Colin leaned forward, dropped the smile, and said something I hadn't expected. "We have a duty to preserve the aesthetic value of this community. If you won't participate voluntarily, we'll have to explore other mechanisms." Other mechanisms. I looked at him for a long moment. I could see it now, the quiet contempt behind the smile, the performance slipping. He wasn't just annoyed, he was threatened, by a man who wouldn't bend, a man he couldn't regulate. I stood up. "Then I suggest," I said, "you start studying the definition of civil harassment, because you're one letter away from becoming a textbook example." And I walked out. I didn't raise my voice, didn't slam the door, didn't threaten a lawsuit, yet. But in that moment, I knew one thing with certainty. This wasn't about shrubs, or siding, or sightlines. It was about erasure, and men like Colin had always counted on quiet resistance fading over time. But I had spent 35 years reading evidence, and I had just discovered my first real clue. There's a funny thing about pressure. Apply too little and it's an annoyance. Apply too much and the whole thing cracks. After the HOA meeting, I took 2 days to cool off. Not because I was angry, I've ruled on double homicides without so much as a raised eyebrow, but because I needed clarity. And something didn't sit right. It wasn't just the pettiness, The language Colin used, the confidence, the way he referenced that zoning amendment from 2014, it wasn't speculation. It was certainty, like he knew something I didn't. So I did what I've done 1,000 times before. I followed the paper. I started at the zoning office, pulled the plat records for parcel 2047B, which is my land, my home, my line in the sand. The records were clean at first. Original deed from 2003. My name, clean title, not encumbered. But then I saw it, a single page, filed 9 years ago. Title, Voluntary Covenant Inclusion Addendum. Filed by the HOA, attached to my parcel. Signed by me, except it wasn't. Now I've signed thousands of documents in my life. Warrants, orders, dissents, settlements. I know my own signature the way I know the veins on the back of my hand. And the one on that page? It was close. Too close. It wasn't some cartoonish forgery. Number whoever did this had a sample, likely scanned, cropped, and pasted into the county record before being printed and rescanned for submission. Most folks wouldn't catch it, but I would, because I've seen it before. Same tilt, same slant, same exact drop on the K in Whitaker. And I knew where it came from. It was lifted straight off a 1997 bench ruling I issued in a public nuisance case. That ruling had been published, archived, available online. Someone had taken my signature from that decision, digitally extracted it, and dropped it onto a fraudulent document to make it look like I'd voluntarily submitted to HOA inclusion back in 2014. Let me say that again, just so it's clear, they forged my signature on a legal document to claim jurisdiction over my land. I remember sitting there in the county office with the copy in my lap. The clerk was still typing something about processing fees when I stood up and said, "Print me everything tied to that submission, chain of custody, timestamps, metadata if you've got it." She blinked. "You want the full trail?" I smiled. "I want the whole forest." Back at home, I laid it all out on my dining table, every page, every fake form, and I stared at that forged signature until the sun went down and the porch lights clicked on. Now it wasn't just a neighborhood scuffle, and it wasn't lawn signs and clipped bushes anymore. It was fraud, and not just civil fraud. Criminal. I was being harassed, fined, surveilled, and threatened based on a document that someone, likely Colin, created with intent to deceive, to seize control over my property, and to wear me down until I sold or surrendered. And I'll tell you this much. I've sent people to prison for less. I sat there that night with a cup of black coffee, no cream, no sugar, and stared through the window at the oak tree I planted 20 years ago. That tree's roots run deep. So do mine. And I'd just found the axe they brought to cut me down. I didn't go straight to a lawyer. That's what they expected. Loud reaction, lawsuit threats, maybe a call to the local news. That's the move most folks make when they feel violated. And understandably so. But I'm not most folks. And I've spent enough time on both sides of a courtroom to know one thing. If you're going to bring fire, you'd better bring fuel, wind, and a paper trail that can't be questioned. So I started quietly. First, I submitted a public records request to the county recorder's office for every HOA amendment, map revision, and parcel integration filed over the last 15 years. I didn't just pull mine, I pulled all of them. 12 binders, 2 weeks, and one very confused part-time archivist later, I had what I needed, a timeline. Next, I scanned the forged signature through a forensic analysis app a friend of mine, a retired federal examiner, still had access to. It confirmed what I already knew. The signature was pixel matched to the 1997 court order. It was copied and pasted digitally. No pen ever touched paper. Then came the best part. I pulled up the HOA's Articles of Association, their public-facing governing Bible, and read every single clause, twice. Not because I expected them to follow it, but because I knew they'd built their power on the assumption that no one else would. On page 46, in a section clearly written by a first-year paralegal, drunk on policy language, I found gold. Voluntary parcel inclusion requires express consent by title holder, notarized and filed within 30 days of submission. There was no notary stamp on the forged document, no signature ID, no filing within the required time frame. And the title holder? That box had been marked as waived due to public agreement. In other words, they'd tried to create a loophole by pretending that my silence was consent, which legally speaking is as valid as marrying someone because they didn't object fast enough at a wedding they weren't invited to. But I wasn't done. I hired a title attorney. Quietly, just a consultation. I showed him the documents, the timeline, the signature, and asked him what he saw. He leaned back, whistled low, and said, "This is a felony, at least one, maybe 3. Will it hold in court? I asked. He nodded. It'll hold. You bring this to a judge, they'll shut that HOA down by lunch. I thanked him, paid in cash, and left without fanfare. Back home, I started building a file, not a legal complaint, a presentation. I wanted it clean. Timeline, evidence, statutes, photos. I formatted it the way I used to prepare bench briefs, tight, logical, bulletproof. Then I bought a burner phone, not for drama, for protection, because something told me that once I started pulling this thread in public, someone in that HOA would panic, and panicking people are dangerous. I started documenting everything. I set up a dedicated cloud folder, recorded any HOA interaction on a motion-activated camera by the mailbox, collected every notice, every sticker, every friendly reminder, and logged them by time and date. And then I went a step further. I reached out to 2 neighbors on my block, older couples, quiet types. We'd waved over the years, shared garden tips, nothing deep, but I remembered something one of them said a year ago about being fined for unauthorized fence paint, even though his fence was 2 decades older than the HOA. So I knocked on his door. He invited me in. I showed him the forged document. He stared at it, then said quietly, "You're not the only one." Turns out they'd done it to others. People who never joined, never signed anything, suddenly receiving citations, late fees, lien threats. Most didn't fight. Some moved. Some paid just to stop the harassment. That's when I knew. This wasn't about my house. It never was. It was a system. Colin had built a quiet empire off intimidation, forged documents, and the assumption that people wouldn't push back. But I would. And I wouldn't just push back. I'd dismantle it, brick by brick, with the law. It started with a website, just a clean, simple WordPress template. Black text, white background, 1 banner across the top. NeighborWatch2047.com, named after my parcel, my home, the epicenter of their little empire's overreach. On the front page, scanned documents, dates, citations, screenshots. No rants, no threats, no clickbait. Just facts, formatted the way any law clerk would recognize. Exhibit A, the forged inclusion agreement side by side with my original 1997 court signature. Exhibit B, a notarization clause in their own charter, left blank. Exhibit C, property maps, filing timestamps, metadata. I linked every document to a public Dropbox with read-only access. Because if there's one thing a bureaucrat fears more than a courtroom, it's a community with receipts. Then I wrote a post, just one. This is my home. I bought it 20 years ago. I designed it, built it, paid for it. I never signed a single document giving the HOA authority over it, but they forged one. I have evidence, and I know I'm not alone. That post got 15 views the first day, mostly bots. By the end of the week, it had 600. By day 10, it had 2,000. Turns out, when you post a forged legal document with the words criminal fraud underneath it, people click. A week later, a retired paralegal from the next county emailed me. My sister lives near you. She had the same problem. Fence citation for a yard, not in their jurisdiction. They bullied her into repainting it gray. I added her case. 3 days later, a retired Navy vet. Same subdivision. Fined for a flagpole that predates the HOA. When he refused, they posted violation warnings on his door. His signature on their acceptance form? Also forged. I compared them side by side. Another copy-paste job from a voter registration archive. I added him too. One by one, the stories started stacking. Each one verified, each one documented it, and every single one pointed back to one name. Colin R. Masterson, president, real estate agent, paper tyrant. I didn't contact a journalist. I was the journalist now. Instead, I submitted a formal complaint to the State Attorney General's office, complete with 47 pages of exhibits and an index page so clean you could eat off it. Then I sent the same complaint with redacted addresses to every city council member, zoning commissioner, and local civic group in the county. I mailed copies to the city's newspaper, not the digital rag, the one that still prints 3 days a week and has a letters to the editor column that retirees read like gospel. And then I printed 500 flyers. Each one had a QR code. HOA overreach? Read the evidence yourself. I didn't put them in mailboxes, that's a federal offense, but I did hang them on bulletin boards, grocery stores, post office, barber shops, hardware stores. By the end of the month, my site had over 18,000 views. And for the first time since this started, Colin blinked. It came in the form of a letter, hand-delivered, ironically enough, by one of the same HOA officers who trespassed on my land 2 months prior. Mr. Whitaker, the Greater Evergreen. Trails HOA formally requests a private meeting to discuss a resolution and mutual de-escalation. I didn't answer, because by then it wasn't just my case anymore. 3 other property owners had joined me in filing formal fraud complaints. One of them was an 84-year-old widow who'd paid nearly $2,000 in fines over landscaping inconsistencies on a home she'd lived in since 1981. She'd kept the receipts, every one of them, like a soldier keeps medals. So I added her story, too. We weren't angry. We were organized. And Colin? He was still busy writing citations. He had no idea the real trial was already underway, not in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. And the jury wasn't amused. It all broke on a Tuesday. City Council had their monthly open meeting, one of those sleepy civic rituals where 3 people show up and 2 of them are retirees who just want the potholes fixed. But that night, the parking lot was full. Standing room only, every folding chair occupied. I counted 4 TV cameras, 2 local reporters, and 1 guy live streaming on Facebook with a gimbal and a ring light strapped to his hoodie. The flyer had done its job. The agenda for the night said general business, but item 4 had been added at the last minute. Discussion. Allegations of fraud and overreach by Greater Evergreen Trails HOA. I hadn't planned to speak. I brought my binder, of course, old habits, but I expected the Attorney General's office to take the lead. They didn't need to. Because the community showed up. One by one, people stood. The Navy vet read from a letter he received threatening to place a lien on his house for unauthorized display of national symbols. The widow read off her fine history like it was a grocery list. $75 for non-uniform mulch coloration, $100 for weather-worn shutters, $50 for planting outside of prescribed symmetry. A young couple explained how they'd tried to repaint their front steps and were told they needed committee approval, despite living 3 blocks outside the HOA boundary. Then came the signatures. 17 cases of alleged forged inclusion documents, 8 with identical signature artifacts, pixel-level copies of other public documents, all filed between 2013 and 2021, all signed voluntarily. Colin was there, of course, front row, tan blazer, pocket square, HOA name tag. He looked like someone sitting at the wrong table in a courtroom, close enough to hear the sentence, too far to object. When the moderator asked if anyone from the HOA leadership would like to respond, Colin stood. I'll give him this. He tried. He used words like misunderstanding, administrative delegation, and well-intended documentation errors. He blamed former clerks, said the HOA was reviewing procedures. Then someone passed a wireless mic to me. I didn't ask for it, but I stood anyway, opened my binder, flipped to the forged signature, held it up. This, I said, is not a misunderstanding. I walked through the timestamp, the submission path, the missing notary stamp, the overlay comparison with my 1997 court ruling. This was an intentional act to assume jurisdiction over property that was never yours. I paused. You didn't request compliance, you fabricated it. The room was dead silent. Then I flipped the next page. This isn't just bad policy, it's criminal. It's document fraud under state statute, section 39.41.02, punishable by up to 5 years. And that's before we get into harassment, attempted extortion, and civil conspiracy. I turned to the council. I urge the city to revoke all municipal recognition of the Greater Evergreen Trails HOA pending full investigation and to refer this matter to the district attorney. Someone in the back started clapping. Others joined. And Colin? He sat down. For once, without a word. The fallout came fast. By Friday, the HOA's website had gone offline. On Monday, the local paper ran a front-page headline. Retired judge uncovers HOA forgery ring. Dozens of homeowners affected. The county clerk's office opened a formal inquiry. The Attorney General's office confirmed a preliminary criminal investigation. And Colin? He resigned. No press conference, no apology, just a dry email to the HOA mailing list citing personal reasons and unforeseen stressors. I'll bet. The city council moved swiftly. They passed an emergency resolution freezing all HOA enforcement actions until further notice. They also began reviewing boundary recognition policies, with a subcommittee assigned to prevent further abuses of voluntary jurisdiction inclusion. The real win, though? The people. The neighborhood started talking again. At coffee shops, on porches, even online, where someone started a meme page called Colin's Compliance Squad, complete with photoshopped badges and fake HOA citations for crimes like excessive humanity and possession of independent thought. It was petty, it was glorious, and it was justice, the kind you don't get from fines or settlements. The kind that lives on in memory. The sign's still there, actually. The one they stuck in my yard months ago. Violation pending, non-compliant property. I mounted it on a piece of reclaimed oak and hung it in my office, right next to the framed copy of my appointment letter from the state judiciary. Some people hang degrees. I hang warnings. Because warnings mean you were never supposed to win. And yet, here we are. The HOA hasn't made a sound since the hearing. The board dissolved. Their enforcement authority revoked by the city. Collins being reviewed for potential misconduct by the State Real Estate Commission. I haven't seen him around lately. His house still has that forced perfection to it. Matching shutters, trimmed hedges, no soul. My place, it's the same as it's always been. Front porch, facing west. Swing creaks a little in the afternoon breeze. The oak tree I planted 20 years ago stands taller than ever. This spring, I added a small bench underneath it. Not store-bought either. Real wood, joined by hand. Sometimes I sit there in the evenings with a glass of rye, just listening. There's peace in knowing you didn't stoop. That you didn't match their petty energy or speak in their shallow language. That you answered fraud with truth and force with form. My grandson came to visit last week. He's 12 now. Likes to ask big questions, the kind I never got around to asking at his age. He sat on the porch with me and pointed at the house across the street, the one with the perfect lawn and nothing real inside. Is that guy still mad at you, Grandpa? I laughed. Doesn't matter. He's not in charge of anything anymore. He nodded, then looked at our yard. You gonna build anything else? Maybe, I said. I've got time. And that's the thing, isn't it? Time. It's what they tried to waste with fake notices, with scare tactics, with legal theater. They thought I'd get tired, sell, shrink. But I don't shrink. I built this house from the ground up. And no one, not a man with a clipboard, not a board full of cowards, not even a smug little tyrant with a title, gets to tell me how to live inside my own lines. Not now. Not ever. So if you're listening to this, if someone's left you a citation or a warning or a forged invitation to hand over your piece, let me tell you what I told myself the first day they stepped onto my lawn. The line only moves if you let it. And mine, it held.